to the District House. Hi, friends. Feels good to look into the audience and see community and feel that sense of consistency to this space. So thank you all for joining us again. My name is Hannah Jo, and I am the host of the District House. And if you're new to District216, this is an event that happens weekly in this space. And I do encourage you to join us because each week is different. And today I'm seated here with Christopher Solomon. Welcome.
Hello.
And you made quite the journey to join us. So I just want to thank you for that. And tonight you'll be speaking about Salvia Divinorum, which is something that I personally have heard some horror stories about.
You and everyone else. Yeah.
So I definitely have a personal curiosity in your presentation tonight. And I would love to hear a little bit more from you about what led you to that plant and why you're here to represent it with such passion.
Yeah. I mean, as you're saying, there's this idea of salvia being a very scary experience or horror stories with it. And that some of my initial experiences with salvia as well were scary and unnerving and meaningless and didn't really seem to carry any sort of knowledge or information or weight. But as I was continuing to use it over the years, I realized that the dosage is extremely key. And the main reason people are having scary experiences is because they're smoking too much. And it's sort of like analogous to chugging a bottle of tequila and saying that's your impression of alcohol. And so over years of working with salvia personally, I realized that there was a completely different side to this substance. It was a lot more calming and meditative and physiologically healing as well, emotionally regulating, and there were all these positive benefits that I was noticing from having a salvia practice in a specific way. And I thought, there's no one else is talking about this, and I'm actually finding pragmatic use about it. So it's been a very slow organic process to where I've just continued to work with it over the years and refined it more and more. And that's what brings me here.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I imagine many people in this community would agree that dosage is super important when it comes to the exploration of these altered states. And I want to invite you to define somatics in your personal understanding and practice and the relationship of somatics to salvia.
Yeah. So, my job title, I guess, is I'm a somatic salvia guide. And so somatics, it's a large field in and of itself, but I guess if you can sum somatics up, it's more about being aware and being present about what's happening, present with what's happening in the body in real time from the felt sense, rather than getting too caught up in the narrative that our thinking and talking mind sometimes does, or getting caught up in the history or the story we have about our past. Somatics is more about what's going on right now and what am I aware or not aware of, and how do I use what's in my body as a sense of intelligent guidance. And so then combining the salvia with the somatics, because salvia is a very physiological kinesthetic medicine. It's less thinking and it's more physically felt. And so the two together make it a very good tool for navigating what's arising in the body in the present moment with mindfulness.
Awesome. Well, I'm very ready for my stories around salvia to be rewritten through your presentation tonight. So I'm going to hop into the audience, and Christopher is going to give us an awesome presentation and slideshow. And my request is that you save your questions for the end so you can take the mic for the audience Q&A.
So a little bit of a joke that I have here. So I call salvia as a misunderstood psychedelic, but then there's also this very strong common felt experience of there being a feminine entity or a strong, powerful feminine presence with salvia. So my joke there is the misunderstood psychedelic instead of misunderstood psychedelic. Also, I will say technically salvia is not a psychedelic, although it does have very strong, profound consciousness altering effects. It doesn't work on the same receptors that regular psychedelics do. So while it does radically shift your consciousness, it's not technically a psychedelic because it's not an alkaloid. For that reason, it actually makes it very good for people who are on SSRIs or other forms of medication that don't work well with psychedelics, they can use salvia, which is very beneficial for many people. Just about me, I think you kind of got the gist of it by the intro interview, but I'm a somatic salvia guide. I provide one-on-one guided salvia sessions with people remotely via Zoom, actually, which has been working very well. I live up in Mendocino County, just a few hours north of San Francisco. I live off-grid in the hills like a hermit, and I grow all my own salvia and make all my own extract. And I just really work with salvia full-time, either growing it, tending it, making medicine, or guiding people or educating people on it. So I'm pretty committed to this fascinating, unique plant. And I went to school for psychology and finance, and then I did my somatic psychotherapy training at the Hakomi Institute, which was a really great school based out of Berkeley, and body-mind centering training as well. But a lot of the stuff that I've learned about salvia, I've learned specifically from salvia experiences himself, because it's a very profound teacher. Now, many people don't really know much about salvia, or even know what it is. Most people, they knew about salvia because back in the day you could buy it at like gas stations or at smoke shops, and you would buy these like super concentrated extracts. And the concentrated extracts look a little bit like fish flakes, and so people would buy this really strong stuff and smoke it and have a complete dissociative out-of-body experience. And they'd think like, whoa, like, how is this stuff legal? And why didn't anyone warn me that I was going to think I died? And so there's this question of what is salvia, and this is the salvia plant right here. These are some of my plants. So there's close to 1,000 different types of salvia. The sage that we cook with is Salvia officinalis. Rosemary was recently reclassified to be a sage, so rosemary is Salvia rosmarinus. There's Salvia recognita, there's Salvia splendens, there's tons of salvias. But this one specific salvia came from the Sierra Mazateca mountain range outside of Oaxaca in Mexico. And it's endemic to that area, which means that that's the only place in the world that it was naturally found. The history of salvia showing up there is a little bit of a mystery as well, because most salvias rarely flower, and when they do flower, they even more rarely go to seed, and then even fewer of those seeds are viable. So it's a very difficult plant to actually spread by propagating seeds. So the only way that the plant really spreads is by taking cuttings of it and then rooting the cuttings and then replanting it. So there had to have been a lot of humans spreading and planting salvia all over the place in order to get it spread all over the Sierra Mazateca mountain range. But there's actually no oral history or no oral tradition of salvia being used for a long period of time in that range, because we know that there's no indigenous name for salvia. There's they call it Ska Maria Pastora, so they believe she's the embodiment of the Virgin Mary. But that means that they only came up with a name for her after the Christianity was firmly planted in that area, which is pretty recently in comparison to how long they've been using all their other medicines. When the conquistadors and the Christians got there, they kind of forced them to adopt Christian names for many of their practices and for many of their sacraments. So there's a Christian name, and then there's the indigenous name for the plant, but salvia has no indigenous name. So it's kind of one of the newer kids on the block. And it's sort of interesting as well, because a lot of the lessons that salvia has to teach us are lessons about kind of futuristic lessons about time travel, about the multiverse, about the fabric of reality on a quantum level, having people experience what it's like to be a primary being at a quantum level. So these are all pretty alien and also out there ideas. So it's a bit of a mysterious plant. Now, a little bit about the salvia morphology is morphology just meaning how the plant looks. You can see it has really nice, deep emerald green leaves with nice big veins. Those are the flowers that sometimes come out in the fall. And I've tried to get my flowers to pollinate, but they haven't really gone to seed. So it's interesting because looking at the morphology of certain plants, they can invite one to explore more. If you would imagine coming across cannabis in the wild, you'd be like, ooh, like, hello, like this is a pungent, sweet smelling plant, and let me try explore it. Or with ayahuasca, like the vine going up, there's something about the way the plant looks or smells or feels that communicates something about how it might have an effect with us. But with salvia, just looking at the plant by itself, it doesn't really communicate anything. It doesn't have any scent. Like a mint leaf, you can squeeze a mint leaf and smell your fingers and it smells really nice. But salvia doesn't smell like anything. It tastes sort of bitter, doesn't have a very pleasant taste. But what's interesting is when you take a cutting of the plant, then it starts to actually communicate with one. Because looking at the cross section of the stem, so salvia has a square stem and there's a circle inscribed inside of the middle. And that's actually an ancient Kabbalah symbol, and it also shows up in some ancient Chinese art. And a circle inscribed inside of a square is essentially a symbol for the fact that divine and consciousness rest in all matter. So the circle is symbolism of the divine or the soul or spirit, and a square is a symbol of the four cardinal directions, the four seasons, this earthly plane. So what's interesting about that is when people think about certain salvia experiences, they have, many people have heard of the experience of smoking salvia and becoming an inanimate object. People smoke salvia and they become a chair or they become a table. It's a very common experience, just to become inanimate. But what's interesting is when you become an inanimate object, then everything you look at becomes animate. And you can actually, I remember I smoked salvia one time and I looked at, there was a hairdryer and the hairdryer was laughing at me because it was like, haha, you thought you were a human, but you're not, you're actually the bed that you're lying on. So I turned into the bed and everything in the room was laughing at me. And it just became very, very alive. So it's kind of fascinating that, by propagating salvia, you take a cutting and then you see this ancient symbol, and that might tune you into the experience that salvia might have in store for one. And salvia, which leads me to the point that salvia is a very relational plant. It's not something that you just do one time and have your trip and then you're good to go. Many times people have a MDMA experience and they just have one life-changing MDMA experience and they're like, wow, it's great and I'm all good to go. Well, many people have that one life-changing mushroom experience. But with salvia, it sort of rewards you by coming back time and time again, getting into a slow, intentional relationship with it, rather than just blasting off and letting the experience be a one-time thing. Similarly, when you're growing the plant, that's a long-term relationship that you're getting into the plant with. So you take a cutting, you let it root, you have to plant it, you have to nurture it, you have to baby it. You really have to keep going back to it time and time again. So I just think it's quite beautiful that the act of taking care of it also teaches one so much about what the plant might have in store for one. Now, it's used traditionally by the Sierra Mazateca curanderos, so its traditional uses, and they still use it today, is for treating a variety of physical illnesses, ailments, depression, intestinal disorders, like swollen belly. It's very good for menstrual cramps. It's very good for insomnia. So it's actually a very potent painkiller, and it's very good at actually getting rid of inflammation in the belly. And if you have food poisoning, for example, a little bit of salvia really settles the stomach. I had some food poisoning one time and I smoked a little bit of salvia and I felt these lines of energy actually coming into my stomach where all the inflammation was. And I felt it taking the inflammation out of my stomach and fanning it across the room. It's, like those fans that like fan open? It felt like that. So it was all the constricted tightness in my stomach kind of got taken out of my belly and was fanned out. And then it just lessened everything. And then I didn't throw up for the rest of the day. I was like, oh, this is great. So the traditional route of administration is done by chewing the leaves. And so that is done with something that's called a quid. So what you do is you take a bunch of leaves. They take them in pairs. So then there's the male and the female energies that are represented in the medicine. So they'll take like 16 pairs of leaves, or 32 leaves, and they'll stack them up and roll them up like that in a cigar. And then you chew with the front of your teeth like a little rabbit, chew, chew, chew. And then you take the leaves and you shove them into the side of your cheeks. and you just hold them there for about 30 minutes. And that's a lot slower experience. It's a lot more mild. It's a lot more gentle. It has some pros and it has some cons. You know, this quitting experience is kind of cumbersome because you have to have a mouthful of leaves and you can't swallow the leaves the entire time, or you can't swallow your saliva because salvia doesn't get absorbed in the stomach. It only gets absorbed when chewing it by the mucous membranes on the inside of the cheeks. And so, you know, you have to have a mouthful of leaves. You have to be chew, chew, chew. It's also very difficult to find the fresh leaves. And generally people don't feel too much from their initial quit experiences. So there's been a lot of stories of people going all the way to Mexico and then they're chewing leaves all night and they don't have any experience happen. And they're like, oh, this stuff doesn't work. But some of the benefits to it is that it's a longer lasting experience. Rather than being a couple-minute experience, it is can last up to 2 hours. It's a lot more gentle. It's a lot more smoother around the edges. There's a longer afterglow as well with the chewed experience. So, but the way I work with it with people is by repeated dosing of very small smoked doses. And the reason why I go that method is, for one, is it's very reliable and it's very consistent as far as what the dosage is. Since I'm doing therapy with people while they're doing a guided session with me, you know, I can't talk to people if they have like a mouthful of leaves. And, you know, one also doesn't really want to talk that much during a salvia experience because one really wants to be still, one really wants to be quiet. It can be a little bit difficult to actually think of words to say, so the thinking part of your brain really shuts down and you can just sit in stillness and in silence. And for that reason, it makes meditating very easy with salvia. You know, there are some people that they can't sit still for even 10 seconds. You know, they sit there and they close their eyes and then their eyes are open, they're looking around and they're sitting there and then they're getting frustrated. But with salvia, you can smoke just one little bowl of salvia and really drop into a deep meditation. You know, I don't know if anyone here has been to like a Vipassana retreat, but, you know, after many days of meditating for many hours, you drop into a sweet spot. You're like, ooh, there's that zone. And with salvia, it's actually very easy to get into that zone. Some images that I have here on how to actually make medicine with Salvia Divinorum. There's the cultivation and care, and I don't use any pesticides or anything like that on my plants, and so I pick them all off manually, so I have to look for caterpillars under the leaves, find these little caterpillars and, you know, feed them to chickens or to birds. Then you harvest and dry the leaves. Curing and drying salvia is actually very easy. It's you just lay them out in some newspaper and dry them out. You get the dried salvia leaf and then you extract it. You can use like alcohol to extract all the salvinorin out of that. And then you evaporate all the salvia, all the alcohol that's extracted the salvia, and you get left with this bunch of dark, black, gooey, tanniny, lipidy stuff. And then you can do further washes of that to get this concentrated salvia extract right there. And then you can go the extra mile and I take a lot of the other things out, which results in pure salvinorin A, and then I reinfuse that back on individual doses. So I do pre-dosed amounts with people, and each dose has about 500 micrograms of salvinorin A on it. So salvia is actually one of the most potent, naturally occurring hallucinogenic substances on the planet. You know, you need a couple of grams of mushrooms to feel something. I mean, even microdosing like half a gram, but still that's a fair amount. Salvia is noticeable at 250 micrograms. That's when it starts to become noticeable. And 1 milligram or 1,000 micrograms is considered too strong for most people. So I was actually part of Johns Hopkins. They did a study on salvia in 2019 where they got 12 participants and they put the 12 participants one at a time in an fMRI machine and smoked a high dose of Salvia Divinorum while they scanned my brain. And they could only find, 11 other people who actually wanted to do the study. There was a 13th person, but she dropped out of the study. It was actually a 3-day study. And this was with Roland Griffiths and Matthew Johnson and the team over at Johns Hopkins. And the first day was just intake, just to see, like, just check your mental health and see if you're going to be fit for the study. So there was some psychological tests that they did, and I spoke a lot to the researchers. The second day, the goal was to just see if you could smoke a high dose of salvia and lay on a couch and not move and not say anything. Because one of the things that happens for people during a salvia experience is you can involuntarily start talking. And many times it's babbling gibberish. Or you involuntarily get up and just start moving around. So you can lose your motor coordination when moving around with salvia. And the thing is, the changes that happen to people during a salvia experience, especially at the high doses, are so objectively real that you think that it's not the salvia that you've smoked that's caused reality to change. You just think that it's just a mere coincidence that you smoked salvia right then, but what's actually happened is reality has literally fallen apart. And there's no way that smoking this little bit of a green herb that is legal could shift your reality that much. And the changes are so objective that one thinks that other people in the room as well can see those changes as well in your own perception. Now, I've never taken LSD and thought that other people in the room can see the visions that I'm seeing, because I'm the one who took the LSD, so I'm the one who's hallucinating. But salvia affects your consciousness in such a objective state and on such a fundamental level that, sometimes people smoke a high dose of salvia and they'll tell their friends to watch out because they'll see reality being like rolled over by a steamroller. And they're like, oh, you guys are going to get crushed by the steamroller that's coming through here. And so for that reason as well, many people, when they have such a strong experience in salvia, it's so unnerving, and they feel like the experience is only taking place in the room in front of them. And they think that if they were to just leave the room, that'll end the trip. So there's this idea of, if I can just get up and get out of here and leave the room, that'll end the trip because it feels so local. But then what people do is they get up and they run out a door and they trip, or there have been some stories of people jumping out of windows while on salvia, because you just think like, there's my exit, here's my chance to escape the simulation, and so then they dive out a window and they hurt themselves. That's I'd say the only danger with salvia is that you can trip and hurt yourself if you walk around. In order for Johns Hopkins to do their study on salvia, they had to prove to the FDA that it was very, very safe for human consumption. And so back in, I think 2008 or something like that is when they first started doing the study. They gave people progressively higher doses of salvia, and they took their vitals before and after, blood work, blood pressure, all those things, and they found that it was very, very safe. And the way that they determined how much salvia to give me during the MRI study is, of all the participants that they did with their studies before, everyone got to a dose where they all tapped out. They were like, that's too far. That's just taking me too far away from reality. So, and that was, a little bit over 1 milligram. And so then they're like, okay, let's just take it down a little bit less than 1 milligram and use that dose to give people that in the MRI study. But other than that, salvia is very physiologically safe. I've worked with people all ages, some people in their late 70s, early 80s, some people with heart conditions or lung problems, people on a whole bunch of medications as well. And one thing that's really nice about salvia is that it just seems to play well with all the other medicines, plant medicines and pharmacological medicines. Doesn't seem to have any negative contraindications. There are some people that, if you're on a higher dose of naltrexone, because that works on similar receptors in the brain, that can dampen the effects of salvia. But other than that, it's I think it's quite wonderful, because there's a lot of people who have been on SSRIs for a long time, and they're like, oh crap, these SSRIs are really not working for me anymore, and I feel like crap, and I gain a lot of weight, and life's difficult. But then they can't do the other medicines like ayahuasca and things like that. So I've worked with quite a few people who we've used salvia as a way to wean them off of their opioids and off of their antidepressants, and then they have a window of time to where they feel as if they can be fine without any medication, and then they can do their mushroom, or then they can do their ayahuasca or their DMT journey. So I said salvia doesn't affect the alkaloid receptors in the brain. It affects the receptors in the brain called the kappa opioid receptor system. So we've got kappa, delta, and mu opioid receptor systems. And when you take things like Vicodin or any sort of opioids, prescription opioids, that affects the mu opioid receptors. And when that happens is you get a spike of dopamine, and you feel good temporarily, and then your dopamine levels come back to normal. But by comparison, your new norm of your lower dopamine levels feel relatively lower. And so then that's why you want to go back to the substance, because you're chasing that dopamine high. Now, comparatively speaking, salvia can be a little bit dysphoric. So rather than be euphoric, it can create sense of just odd sensations in the body. So they've actually tried to make painkillers using kappa opioid receptors. So they were using salvia to try and make painkillers, but with salvia you have to approach it with some mindfulness, and you have to relax into the experience, and you have to track it, and you have to be aware of it. But you can't really make a mass market medicine if people have to actually approach their medicine with any sort of care or intentionality. So salvia also can temporarily lower your dopamine levels. And so for a short amount of time, your dopamine levels go a little bit lower, just for a couple of minutes, and then they come back up to normal. And relatively speaking, your new baseline of normal dopamine feels, relatively speaking, it feels like a mood lift. And so that's why it's very good for dealing with addiction problems. And when one has a salvia practice, being sober actually feels great. Versus, when one has a drinking problem, or even if one's smoking too much cannabis, being sober can feel boring. You're like, oh, I can't really do anything until I smoke a little bit of cannabis, and now it's interesting again. Not that cannabis affects the opioid receptors, but so for that reason, it's a very great neutralizer. I like to think of salvia as, one of the benefits that it has is if you're up and manic and anxious, it'll bring you down to a nice stable baseline. But if you're feeling depressed and lethargic and no motivation, it'll bring you up. So, my goal, without being too goal-oriented when working with people, is to just have a very nice, stable sense of existence. Just to feel okay, I think is a wonderful place to be. And once you feel okay and grounded and resourced and spaciousness within, then you can engage with life from a more present place, and then you can start to add to your own life from there. Something unique about salvia, many of the unique things, is its ability to change our perception of space of ourself, and our ability to change our perception of the space of our emotional body and our physical body and our energetic body. So with salvia, it can really do a very good job of parsing out the different levels of reality and consciousness that comprise our entire being. And so, there are many times when people are smoking salvia or chewing it, and they can feel like, oh, like my emotional body is totally right here. You can actually feel this split happening. So you can feel your emotions over here, you can feel your physical body over here, and then you can feel your energetic body over here. And you can see how they all work together, but they don't necessarily have to influence each other in the ways that we think they do. Like a clear example of that is I was working with someone and he had a lot of anxiety. So if one has high anxiety in general, smoking a little bit of salvia just completely calms it down. There's a few people I know who've actually smoked salvia in the midst of panic attacks. There's this one guy that I know, and he was having a panic attack, and he was saying to his friends, like, guys, you got to take him to the hospital, like this is bad. And his friends were like, hey, don't you remember, like you told us last time, because he forgets about salvia in that state. And his friends were like, you told us to tell you just to smoke some salvia. And he was like, oh, right. And he smoked a little bit of salvia, and within literally minutes, it's as if the panic attack wasn't even there. So it's extremely regulating. For that reason, it can be good for people with insomnia if the cause of your insomnia is from a racing mind and from anxiety. Yeah, I was working with someone, and he felt his heart rate begin to increase during the salvia experience. And he thought like, oh shit, I'm going to have a panic attack, because he was like, oh, I know this feeling really well. Like when I feel this feeling in my heart and in my chest, it means I'm going to spiral down this rabbit hole. But one thing that salvia can do is give one a sense of objective distance about the various parts of ourself. So for that reason, it's very good for parts work as well, if you want to work with different parts of your being. But he felt his heart rate increasing, but then he felt his anxiety being like over here. And he noticed that during the salvia experience, the anxiety and the feeling of he noticed the thoughts and the emotions that are associated with the anxiety, and he felt the physiological experience of the anxiety, and the tie between them was broken. And so he had an experience of feeling the anxious feelings, but not having the emotionally anxious spiral process happen. And it broke that connection for him, and he got some objective distance. And then what he felt salvia communicating with him was like, just because you're feeling this physiological feeling, it doesn't mean that you have to, it doesn't even mean you're anxious, actually. And it doesn't even mean that you have to spiral down the same path. And so it was the first time in his life that he was like, wow, yeah, I can actually just feel an increased heart rate, and that's all it is. It doesn't mean that I'm going to go down this path that I've gone down through so many times before. So, just having this experience of being able to get an objective sense of felt distance. And salvia can be a very emotionally neutralizing effect. Some people, they can feel a little bit bummed during a salvia experience because they're like, oh, I thought I was going to feel like all these big feelings. And they're like, nope, you actually just felt okay and normal. And, many times people realize like, oh, that's actually like I'm chasing these big experiences. Many people also always go for like high dose LSD or high dose DMT experiences because they're looking for these big blowout experiences. And they think if I didn't go on an emotional roller coaster, did I heal? Is there, or, if I don't come back with an epic story to tell people, then then what's the point of my journey? And many times with salvia, she's like, no, like, don't tell people about your salvia experience. It's not about a story to tell. It's not about the dragons that you slayed. It's not about you clawing your way through life. It's about how can you sit with yourself in stillness, with calmness, with peace, with objectivity, and with equanimity for everything that's arising. So low doses of salvia and meditation go together like two peas in a pod. High doses of salvia are good if you want to transcend space and time completely. And that can be unnerving. So rather than smoke one big bowl of salvia, what I do with people is we do multiple small bowls with about 5 minutes between each one of those bowls. Back in 2012, I had this really big swollen lymph node in my neck, and I was coming down to Santa Barbara a lot. And I tried everything to get rid of the swollen lymph node. I went to a bunch of ear, nose, and throat specialists, and I went in a whole bunch of different courses of antibiotics. And they said I have to have my tonsils removed. I stopped drinking coffee. I stopped drinking alcohol. I stopped smoking cannabis. I went all vegan. I was like, what the heck is this recurring thing? And nothing could get rid of it. For months, this damn thing was there. And so one time I was here, funnily enough, I don't know if you guys know the Hotel Santa Barbara, just right across the street from Joe's Cafe. So that's actually where I was. And I had some salvia with me. And I smoked some salvia. And usually with my salvia experiences, I felt energy kind of spreading out from my body. But in this particular time, I felt what felt like tons of little energetic ants almost crawling up my legs and my arms. And they crawled straight to where the swollen lymph node was. And my hand automatically picked itself up. And the thought I had while I was picking my hand up was, oh, let me just heal myself. which was funny because I've been trying to do that for months as well. And also, when you have like a sore thing on the body, you can't help but like prod it and poke it. If you have a sore tooth, you're like, oh, my tooth. But the same thing with the swollen lymph node. I'd been poking it and prodding it for ages, but on the effects of salvia, my hand automatically picked itself up, and I pressed on the lymph node and I massaged it in a circle like this. And when I did one full rotation, I just felt it split in two. And then I massaged it again in a circle and I felt it split in four. And then again, 8, 16. Every single time I massaged it in a circle, it divided in half and half and half and half. So it just felt like little grains of sand. And then when those got so small that I couldn't even feel it anymore, the energy that had congregated to that area in my neck uncongregated and poof, left my body. And then I like lay there for like maybe another 5 or 10 minutes, just meditating, laying there in sort of like a sleepy, dreamlike haze. Then I kind of came to, and I was like, whoa, like what the heck just happened? And I remember I jumped out off of like the hotel bed and I ran to the bathroom, and I like opened my mouth and I looked and I saw that the swollen lymph node was no longer there, and I couldn't feel it anymore either, and it stayed gone and never came back. And I was really taken aback. I was like, what the hell just happened? I didn't even know that like spontaneous healings like that could happen. I'd heard about them, but I was like, yeah, maybe not. So it was interesting because then, and I wish I could remember like what room I was in Hotel Santa Barbara, because it'd be fun to like check into that room and smoke salvia again, because that was 12 years ago. So that would make some sort of like 12-year cycle of having salvia in that room. Or I was thinking you could do like a tourist thing, like come see the room where salvia healed this random dude, $5 entry. Yeah, no, so I was like, wow, that was crazy. This lymph node is gone. And so only then did I go online and I started looking things up online, and I typed in like Salvia Divinorum healing or illness. And then I found on some of the older drug forums, like I don't remember what some of the big ones were in 2012, like the Shroomery and stuff like that. And then I saw there were a few reports of other people on there saying like, yeah, every time I get sick, I smoke salvia and like I just feel better. And there were a few people on there. There were 2 people on there saying that they had HIV/AIDS, and every time that their T cell counts got low, they would smoke salvia and it would bring them back up. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I didn't know. So I wasn't going to the plant for a healing experience. It just happened. Yeah, and then I found someone else saying, oh yeah, all the Mazateks use it for healing. And so I always think it's cool when you discover something yourself first and then find out afterwards that that was its intended purpose. But then I also had some certain salvia experiences that were just way too strong. Like I forgot I smoked salvia because I had eye shades on and earplugs in. I didn't have any clothes on, so I was doing sensory deprivation. I smoked a big old bowl of this 20x extract, and forgot I smoked salvia. Forgot I had earplugs and eye shades on. And so all of a sudden, there was just nothing. And I was like, oh, where the hell am I? Like, I thought I was sitting in my room. And what year was this? This was 2008 that this happened. I was like, weird. Like, I was in my apartment, but now there's nothing. And also because my body was sort of no longer there as well, me like moving around, my sense of proprioception was all thrown off as well. So I was just all of a sudden in this void of darkness. And I thought like, holy shit, where did I go? And then I was like, oh, I smoked salvia. And so my next logical thought was, I've killed myself. And I was like really pissed off that I killed myself. And then I was like, oh man, like who found my body? Like, did the neighbors smell something bad coming from my apartment? And then did the fire people have to like bang the door down and then find my naked dead body next to a bong? That's embarrassing. And something happened with salvia. Time dilation happened. So time can feel really, really, really stretched out. And so it was almost like every second in real time felt like a week or 2 weeks. So by the end of a couple of seconds, I was just like, oh shit, well, like, by now, like, my funeral has happened, and my poor mom and dad and sister, and I was like, well, by now, they're also dead, and, well, by now, Like the continent, like America is maybe up against Australia because the continental planes have shifted so much, and just time was getting longer and longer and longer. Um, and I was like, well, by now the sun's exploded and there's no longer even an Earth. So even like if I wanted to get back to Earth by like maybe the process of reincarnation, I couldn't because the Earth doesn't even exist anymore. So as that was happening, I then felt myself becoming a square, and I was just one square in a whole grid of squares, sort of like graph paper. And so I was a square, and the next to me was a square, and the next to me was a square. And the square was a two-dimensional plane that was moving through space. And as it was moving through space, it was leaving a wake, a trail in it, behind it. And so each square was representative of a human soul that had one point been alive on planet Earth, or would be alive in the future. It was just like the grid of souls. And the two-dimensional plane was representative of now, and the trail it was leaving in its past behind it was creating time and space. And I was like, oh, so this is how it works. And then the individual lines actually disappeared, and I just became all the consciousnesses. Conscious I don't know. And then the square started to get stretched out into like a long rectangle, and it kept getting stretched out long, till it was just a line. And then when it became a line, it started to vibrate and it became a wave. And that was the peak of that experience, where I was just a vibrational wave. And I heard it and I felt it. Wom, 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 wom. And I remember the last thought I had was that it was really, really, really lonely. Just being a wave of all existence, and like that was all there ever was, and that's all there ever will be, just this pure vibrational wave. And I just really missed having a human body, and I missed the ability of being able to relate with anything, with anyone. Like the idea of other to relate to, and that not being there was just existentially like terrifying for me. So it was, I was like, wow, like eternal loneliness all by myself, like with only my thoughts. But then my thinking mind stopped completely, and all I was aware of was the sound and the feeling of the wave. And so I was like that for a while, and then all of a sudden, I just like, boom, got thrown back into my body. And as I was rocketing, I actually felt myself like rocket back into my body. And as I was rocketing back into my body, the first three thoughts, the first three words that came to mind were, my sister's name is Melissa. It was Mom, Dad, Melissa. It was Mom, Dad, Melissa, Mom, Dad, Melissa, Mom, Dad, Melissa. Then boom, me. And I was like, wow, that was, I realized later, I was like, that's sort of interesting. That was the progression of, you know, my dad was older, and then my mom, and then my sister, and then I'm the younger one. So it was just interesting that I kind of came back to myself through the progression of my family line. And so I remembered then I was like, oh shit, I have a body, and I ripped the blindfold off. And what's funny is all those consciousnesses that were in the individual grids, they were all in the apartment with me. So the air was just filled with every conscious being ever, like thick, thick, thick. And it's funny, I'm not a body shy person, but you know, those dreams are like, oh, you're naked in front of the school, and that's the worst dream. But in this particular case, I was naked in front of the entire universe. And I was like, oh, sorry guys. And so like, I remember like, I went straight to my closet and I got some pajama pants and I put some clothes on. And then I immediately I sat there for like a few minutes, just like, whoa, what the fuck was that? You know? And I called my dad and I was like, Dad, I just transcended space and time. He was like, are you okay? And I told him all about it. It was cool. I could talk to him about those things. But I didn't touch salvia for over a year after that. You know, it took a long time to integrate that experience. It was profound, but it was also terrifying. So then what I started to do was, rather than smoking one big bowl, I started to divide the bowls into smaller bowls. So I asked myself, what's the minimum amount of salvia that I need to smoke at all in order to feel anything? So I got this salvia extract. So the stuff that's like in these capsules, that's considered 10x extract. And what that means is I've taken 10 grams of the dried leaf and I've reinfused that on a 1 gram of leaf. So it's a 10 times concentrate. You can smoke the plain salvia leaf as well, but with this extract, it's more standardized and you get less smoke in your lungs. So I started with just a few flakes of extract and I'd smoke that and think like, oh, okay, I don't really feel anything. And then I'd smoke a little bit more. And the first thing I started to notice with salvia is just that my mind became very still and quiet. And all I wanted to do was sit there in silence and meditate. And I was like, okay, a super light dose of salvia is nice and gentle. This is actually feels pretty supportive and pretty nourishing. But then one thing I ran into was I'd be having these meditative sessions with salvia, and as I was meditating, I'd have to then like reload another bowl. So I'd have to get my little baggie of salvia and I'd have to like get a little tiny scooper and I'd have to reload it. And it was just getting in the way of my being able to sit with the experience and be with the experience. It got to a point where every time I smoked salvia, I had this thought like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if there was a bowl, there was like a pipe with multiple bowls and I could preload the bowls beforehand. And every single time I smoked salvia, that's the only thing that came up, and it was really annoying. So I was looking for something on the market and nothing really existed. So I figured I just might as well go make them. And so I make this salvia pipe. So you can see it's this, we've got these 5 bowls and you add a little bit of water to the jar and you put a little bit of salvia in each one of them. And then, so there's a few reasons for this that I do the multiple bowls as well, is that way you can slowly work your way into a salvia space, but also it's nice that you preloaded your bowls while you were not going into a dissociative space. Because, you know, if you feel like you don't have much of a body anymore, it's difficult to accurately measure a very potent hallucinogenic substance. So you load 1 capsule per bowl and you know that you loaded it while you're sober. And then you smoke one of the bowls and then sit and quietly be with the medicine for at least 5 minutes. I don't like to have music playing in the background of my salvia experiences because you really just want silence and stillness and maybe more of a dark room. It's much more of a introspective meditative experience than it is let the music do the journeying and the guiding. You know, I've had a few salvia experiences where I smoked salvia with music playing, and it was nice because I turned into the music. And I was listening to like a Vivaldi lute suite, and so I turned into a Vivaldi lute suite, and that was nice. But then the next time I tried it, it was just aggravating and annoying. So one really wants silence. And then once you've smoked the bowl and you're ready to go a little bit deeper, you just pick up the bowls and rotate it and move on to the next one. And, you know, what I recommend to people, rather than playing with the dosage of salvia, play with the timing between the bowls. Because the salvia experience can happen sort of in like quantum leaps. You can be like, oh, I'm good in this realm. And then they can be like, it's not like a linear progression. It's just like, oh, shit, you know, now I'm a little bit too far, you know. And so I have some salvia pipes here that I brought down to buy if anyone wants them. And I have the salvia in the pre-dose capsules as well. I could only fit 12 pipes in my backpack, so that's all I was able to bring. But you can also get them online. But, you know, I'm really, you know, encouraged by all the people that I've guided as well and seeing the transformative experiences that they've had. You know, many people, they come to me because they're like, I had a scary salvia experience when I was 17 and now I'm like 45 or something. And they're like, I could tell that there was something more there. Can you reintroduce me to salvia in a way to where it doesn't freak me out? I have this thing, it's called the Somatic Salvia Network. And it's just a network of like, you can join it if it's like $9 a month. And we have like almost weekly integration circles. And we have lots of discussions and chats back and forth, and there's places where people can upload their experience reports, and people are like, oh yeah, like I had that similar experience. Like I was doing one integration circle and 4 people on the call, from one guy was from India, one guy was from Australia, one guy was from Uruguay, and then there was me. And that week we'd all had salvia experiences where our grandmothers made an appearance, which is not something that usually happens. You know, my salvia experiences are usually more like sitting in spacious stillness while I bring questions to mind, or creative visualization. It's very good with salvia. When one has a salvia practice as well, one notices that a lot of synchronicities start to happen in one's life. It really seems to just line things up for one. So it seems like salvia does a very good job of kind of setting up the stage for us, but then it's up to us to engage with it. She's like, I'm going to help set the stage so I can present the opportunities to you, but you're also going to have to carry the torch from here on out and engage with the way that synchronicities are lining up. So it's a very relational, you have to engage with it, you have to be mindful. And at the same time, since it's such a strong energetic medicine, one can really just sit and meditate with seeing where the experience shows up in the body and how the experience shows up. Don't go for meaning making, just go for tracking it and seeing it's showing up here, it feels like this, it's moving in this direction. And then there's this thing about salvia introducing a sense of inertia into one's life as well. Like with salvia, people will feel themselves being like ushered somewhere. And hurry, hurry, let's go. This sense of like, hey, there's almost like you're late for something, like you got to go. So what I've noticed, and many other people have noticed as well, is when you meditate with salvia and you feel these physiological, kinesthetic, tactile feelings moving through your body, all you have to do is track and be aware of them and observe them. But then one feels after that there's much less resistance to getting things done in life. It was actually kind of funny. I had a client last week. She was saying that, her husband smoked some of the capsules and he didn't feel anything. He smoked like 3 of the capsules and he was like, no, I didn't feel anything. But then she said, like later that day, he just got so many things done that he'd been putting off for, she said, literally like years. And he was just like, oh, I'm just going to do this thing. And he's like, oh, you know what? Now that I did this, I'm just going to do this thing. And she was like, whoa, look at him go. But it doesn't come from a place of like manicness as well. And that's what's really nice because it has such a grounding quality. It's not like, you take Adderall and you're like, oh, I'm going to get things done, but because you're like tweaking. But with salvia, there's just less resistance. There's like this effortless way that you can just kind of move through things. So she was laughing about it because she was just like, maybe I just need to get him to smoke more salvia and then he'll get more done around the house. And I think that that's a very good testament to the fact that like, yeah, you don't actually have to know what's going on with these deep-seated energetic shifts that are happening. Just let salvia do what it needs to do. I think we have just like a few minutes left, and then we can open that up to questions. Contact info. If you want to reach out to me, that's my email address. And I was recently shadow banned on Instagram. So if you look up Salvia Healings on Instagram, I don't show up on the searches, which is really annoying. But I think if you type it in Google and then click the link that comes up, or I've got a QR code over there if you want to follow me on Instagram. And then you can if you don't get the pipe and supplies here tonight, you can get them on my shop. I do free 20-minute Zoom consultations as well, then guided sessions remotely via Zoom. And the way that works is I just mail you all the supplies and then we set up about 2 hours and I just walk you through smoking the 5 bowls and we just track what arises with each bowl. We can get clear on intentions as well and see how to work with salvia. But one thing I really encourage people to do is I view myself as more like a teacher and an on-ramper. Like I want to on-ramp you to learn how to use salvia in a way to where it's effective and not scary and nourishing and supportive. But where the good juicy stuff comes from is one's solo practice with salvia, where you visit it. Like some people smoke it once a week, some people smoke it once a month. A few weeks ago, I smoked just 1 bowl every morning with my meditation. And that was a very nice, grounded week. You don't build a tolerance to it. There's actually reverse tolerance. So you get more sensitive to it over time. And it works very well with other medicines as well. It works really well. If you're microdosing anything else, it plays nicely with other things. I make this stuff called Sali Changa, which is salvia with a light dose of DMT infused onto it. And that's really wonderful because it takes the nausea and the body load away from the DMT. And it takes the anxiety away from the DMT, slows the DMT experience down a little bit, and the messages of the DMT are a little bit more clear. So the salvia is very somatic and grounding and rooting, but then with the DMT, you get like the energetic, heart-opening side to things as well. So they play really well together. Someone was actually telling me recently that anytime he drinks ayahuasca, he chews salvia leaves during the ayahuasca experience, and it takes away all the stomach discomfort from the ayahuasca experience, and he finds himself able to go a whole lot deeper. So, I can see that making sense just because it does have anti-inflammatory effects on the stomach. Any questions or anything like that?
Oh, Christopher, I
Mhm.
have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I have some salvia at home. It's in the dried form,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know exactly what to do with that, whether that's a safe thing, or I should just throw it out and get some of your capsules.
Yeah, it lasts for a very long time. I've had some so it's just plain dried salvia leaf.
Correct.
Okay. Um, Definitely don't throw it out because I've had some salvia that's lasted for years and it remains as potent. So, what some people like to do with the dried leaf, if they want to do the chewed method, is a good starting dose is maybe like 2 grams of leaf, and you could chew that up and just keep it in your cheek, and it'll be a gentle, mild experience. Very bitter though, very, very bitter. So some people, if you want, you can sprinkle a little bit of salt in your mouth, and that'll cut out your taste buds' ability to register bitterness. Smoking it, it's if you can start with maybe a little flake of leaf, maybe like the size of your thumbnail, and just try smoke that and hold your breath for 10 seconds and exhale and then just see what comes from that. If one doesn't like smoke in one's lungs, one has to smoke quite a decent-ish amount of plain leaf. So, but it is possible to smoke too much of even plain leaf. I've been surprised one time I smoked some plain leaf and I was just like, whoa, I didn't expect to be going this far. Because there's the same amount of salvinorin A, which is the active compound in salvia. There's the same amount of salvinorin A on a big leaf versus a small leaf. And so if you're smoking plain leaf, you don't know if you're smoking salvia from a little leaf or a big leaf. So if you're going just by weight and you're smoking it from a small leaf, you're going to be getting more bang for your buck than if you were smoking from like a bigger leaf. So, but you can always start low and just try it out. Or with my capsules, that's just pretty guaranteed to not have like a freak out experience.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Christopher. Thank you so much. Thank you, Hannah and Jacob. So I worked with Christopher, I don't know, maybe a week ago. And it was a wonderful session. So I can share, I guess I'll start by sharing my experience with that. Should I stick with questions here? Sorry.
You can share it. I'm open to anything. Yeah.
I really felt like sharing. So my it was really great working with Christopher, especially, I went through we did 3 bowls, and come the 3rd bowl, I was having a hard time just, I was having a hard time talking my way through it. And even through Zoom, I could hear his voice guiding me through. And I thought it was just like absolutely magic that you were able to kind of see what I was going through. I was explaining it, and then that you had the intuition or what have you to remind me to see where it was centered, where there was like a centering or like an assembly of where all the energy the tactile or physical energy, there was like a center of it, and I kind of focused on there, and that's where I found more of the deeper wisdom. It was almost like a portal. And so yeah, overall the experience was the insight for me was that there is no like limit to the power that one can come into. I had previously had a pretty decent open throat chakra. I felt like I was a very vocal person, but I've grown more into that since this last week.
Great.
And I've was just a reminder to just grow more. There's no reason to ever cap oneself off from how much flow they can bring in. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for making that point. I mean, that's a very good point with this. Yeah, there is no limit, and there's also not one way in which one has to engage with, like you mentioned, like the throat chakra. Makes me think of someone I was working with one time, and she was doing these like Kundalini exercises, and she was saying every single time the energy got to like this area here, it just got stuck, and she just couldn't. She was just like, dang it, like. And she had all these reasons and theories as to why that was the case. And so we were doing a salvia session together, and she felt like the energy rising up in her chakras. And then when it got to the area that was stuck, she felt salvia actually take the energy that was stuck and take it out and just bypass the stuckness. And, so salvia communicated with her and essentially said, like, you don't have to bring your energy to the top through such a narrowly defined space, like there's other ways of doing things, and so she was like, oh wow, yeah, like I could actually just bypass the stuck area, and because there's all these other open energies that are channels of energy that are open, not even within us, but outside and around us as well. So Salvia was like, stop being so narrow-minded on where you think you are stuck, and actually just see that there's so many other ways that you can grow and progress and move forward. So
I appreciate that. That was like the other part of the session was acknowledging the backside of my body, including in yoga practice and in other ways. I've been more aware of not being so forward oriented and just kind of kicking back a little more.
Right.
Yeah. But I appreciate that. The physical experience is really profound and unique. I'm also more curious about your Changa.
Sali Changa.
Yeah, Sali Changa. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about entities, and I think that's. Oh yeah, I was curious. Why was the study chosen for painkillers? I mean, I understand why, but as opposed to the profound experience of healing examination and rather like diagnosis and clearing of ailments. That seems like a profound and kind of repeated theme.
Right. Yeah. So the salvia entities are definitely distinct and unique and very different from the DMT entities. One thing that I didn't really touch on is at a higher dose, one gets taken to this place that people refer to as Salvia Land. And in there are entities, and it's more like a simple village but some of the entities are, there's blacksmiths, there's farm workers, school teachers in a schoolhouse is very common, or to be a student in a schoolhouse is quite common. Parades and carnivals and circus-like themes are also pretty common in Salvia Land. One time I was in Salvia Land and these two little girls ran up to me and they're all excited and they're like, oh, you're back. Tell us, what was it like? And they meant like, now that you're back in the land of the dead, what was it like when you were alive on Earth? And it was sort of like, what adventures did you get into? What sort of like, how rich of a life did you live and what sort of stories did you create for yourself on Earth? So there's been this theme of storytelling in Salvia Land, which is quite important. And almost this idea like we're on Earth in order just to create badass epic stories and live a fun, full, rich life. And then we can use those to sort of like tell everyone back home what it was like. And now the study, so there's been a few, I guess, different organizations that have been trying to make painkillers from kappa opioid receptor agonists. But the Johns Hopkins study was specifically around just seeing how salvia affects the brain they essentially wanted to see what parts of the brain do and don't communicate on salvia. And what they found with that study actually is that salvia affects the default mode network more than any of the other psychedelics, like way more than any of the other psychedelics. And so one of the researchers was like, it's kind of funny that everyone talks about like mushrooms in the default mode network, but salvia is actually the one that's doing like way more of the effect in the default mode network. And one of the things that the default mode network is responsible for is kind of curating our autobiographical sense of ourselves. And so that's why on salvia, when the default mode network gets changed in the way that it does, we do lose our sense of our self-identity, but we also lose our sense of our story. But that's really great because then we just drop into the present moment and we're not caught in the story of like, oh, I was the person that got yelled at by my third grade teacher. Those things just don't really have as much of a hold on one anymore. But to your point, not much is known at all about how salvia works on the brain. It's because they only very recently figured out how to do the mathematics in order to study the areas of the brain, because it affects a part of the brain called the colostrum, which is very thin and spread all out the brain. And so the MRI imaging technology, like the voxels, which is a three-dimensional pixel, the 3D pixel of an MRI would overlap the areas that they were trying to study. So they got all this interfering data. But it was only a few years ago that some British guy figured out the mathematics to cancel out the other areas. And so anyway, it's like cutting edge. There's really not much known about exactly what salvia is doing, at least on the scientific level, at least from what instruments can observe.
So you mentioned either your friend or a client when his heart started beating and he felt like he was going to go into a panic attack, and the salvia circumvented that. I want to understand that because I've used my own magicianship to survive severe panic attacks, kind of mind over matter with different substances that were me trusting rationally or irrationally that that's going to help me. But this feels to me conceptually like it's completely somatic. So would you address that a little bit?
Yeah, it was the ease at which it did it was quite astounding. He wasn't like, oh, let me employ these tools that I know, or as you say, magicianship, which I really like. It just seemed as if it sort of happened automatically for him. And it seemed as if salvia was the one that was almost instructing him on where to place his awareness.
And the thing that fascinated me about the way you portrayed it was there was a separation that he could have a dialogue with, which that more than anything helps circumvent going into the irrational brain.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, I was, another way you can think about it is, anxiety itself, it's a very big, overwhelming feeling. It kind of feels like it takes up one's entire being, and you're just like filled to the brim with it. But with salvia, because there's this extra spaciousness that can occur, the size of your anxiety remains the same, but the bigness of your psyche and your being gets way bigger. And
so it's empowering.
It's empowering, yeah. And it doesn't, it just feels, you're like, oh wow, this thing that I thought was like taking up my entire psyche, I'm actually realizing that it's just a little blip, but there's so much more to me. And then what that moreness introduces for many people is a sense of curiosity. And when you're curious, you can at least be more open to things.
Yeah, knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
My question for you is, I understand you went to school for psychotherapy. And so your current offering of your somatic salvia services, is that you holding space as a therapist?
Not as, so the somatic psychotherapy school that I went to, the Hakomi Institute, it was a 2-year training program, but but I'm not technically a therapist. So I'm not licensed as a therapist. But I do incorporate the tools and techniques that I learned in the somatic therapy training program in my Salvia sessions. Is that your question?
Yeah. And what are a few of those techniques just off the top?
Oh yeah, sure. Like a lot of it is so Salvia works really well at meeting people where they are at with the tools that it knows they know best. So, for example, like people who are long-term meditators, Salvia comes at them with a meditative aspect. People who've done a lot of IFS or parts work, Salvia seems to meet them with that. And so a lot of it is just meeting the client within the framework that they are already comfortable in. But also that being said, you know, a lot of the somatics is seeing where it is in your body, what it's like in your body, if there's any particular direction that it's heading, where is it coming from, where is it going to, reminding people of just the various avenues in which they can tap into those parts of their body from a physiological sense. It's very little analyzing, so it's not saying like, oh, because you're feeling something in your right knee, this means X, you know. Let's see, what do I do? I mean, it's also very organic. Like I think it is, because it is such a relational plant and the session itself is so relational with the person. I don't really have like a set of things that I do necessarily. Like I don't guide one on a specific I'm not like envision a golden door and walk through the golden door, you know, because they might not care about a golden door. But a lot of it is just, I guess you could just say, focusing on mindfulness, what's showing up in the present moment, curiously tracking that, and not holding on to anything necessarily too tightly. So having your attention be alert and aware and tracking, but not holding on to anything. And, you know, so sometimes like you can see if someone's just like tense, you know, and that's what regular like old school psychoanalysis kind of missed out on. They didn't listen to how people said things, or they didn't look into like how the person is holding their body. You know, if the person's like, oh yeah, I'm totally fine, you know, and they would just be like, oh, they said they're totally fine, but this is like not a totally fine position, you know. So a lot of it is just contacting and tracking what their body is expressing as well.
I do have a few more questions for you. Before we get into that, I just wanted to appreciate you truly being a pioneer with the Salvia medicine.
Thank you.
And I was a bit surprised, like with your topic and just with you. And I definitely feel the softening and opening within myself of exploring Salvia in your very grounded presentation of it.
Thanks.
So yeah, thank you
I'm
for
glad
that.
to hear that.
Thank you for being a pioneer, and I always just celebrate people sharing their voices with us here. The other thing that I felt was really interesting is like your frequent seemingly Salvia usage being the primary information that you've gathered about the potency of that medicine work. And I just felt how pivotal specifically that lymph experience was for you.
Right.
And yeah, so I just wanted to thank you especially for sharing that part.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the only way I can really know something is if I do it myself and experience it firsthand. Some people are good at reading something and then being able to know it, but I'm kind of a nuts and bolts guy. I have to experience it first before I have any comprehension of it.
Yeah, totally. And that's felt when you share about it. Cool.
Yay.
So my last few questions for you. The first is, what is your perception of the afterlife? And do you feel that Salvia or other psychedelics give us access to that?
Wow. It's so interesting because one can have so many different perceptions of the afterlife depending on the substance that you take. I mean, I do believe that, you know, consciousness is primary, and then matter arises out of that. And so I don't know whether, so during the Johns Hopkins experience, when they gave me the salvia and the MRI, it progressively became bigger and bigger. I turned into the MRI, and then I turned into the hospital that I was in, and then I turned into like the world, and then I got bigger and bigger and bigger. And at the peak of that experience, I felt like I was just an orb floating in space, and there were other orbs floating in space as well. And I felt like I could break through the orb. And so it felt like if I picked up my arms and went like this, I'd break through the orb, and breaking through the orb would birth me into the next reality. But the material that I had to create that next reality could only be as good as the amount that I learned on this earth. So just based on that experience, it seemed like the afterlife is maybe a continuation of knowledge that we deeply learned in this plane of existence. And then you can use that as tools in your toolbox to maybe create your next afterlife. I think one maybe has to be careful not to put too much stock into one's experiences as well, because now that gives me that model of the afterlife. But then if I were to look at the Salvia experience where I turn into a vibrational wave of everything, there was no afterlife because there was no after, because there was no more time. So yeah, I'm going to have to think on that question and let you know after I die once what happens. Yeah.
I feel like what you're showing me is your comfort in the not knowingness. And I feel like that's a really important place to be.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of during that study, the Johns Hopkins one, when I was at this orb and I thought I died. I was talking to Roland Griffiths about it afterwards, and he was like, let me get this straight. You thought you died, and you could birth yourself into another reality, but you don't seem like rattled by that. He was like, usually people are really freaked out when they think that they've died. And I was like, yeah, it was what it was, I guess. Maybe because I'd had that previous Salvia experience where I thought I killed myself. I don't know, maybe, because I've had ayahuasca experiences where I thought I was dying. And so maybe the process of dying is scarier than the end result of death. I don't know. Or it also could be as well because Salvia has more of that emotionally neutralizing effect, that it maybe would take some of that fear away of actually realizing that you might have died. Yeah.
Or it's how you've cultivated your soul in previous lifetimes to be with the remembrance that it's not anything to be distraught about in the current human iteration.
That would be great. Let's go with that.
Yeah. My next question is there a psychedelic or plant medicine that you've always wanted to explore and look forward to eventually?
I've been getting more curious about iboga recently. I don't know why. That's just been feeling quite interesting to me. I've microdosed with iboga, and I enjoyed that, or I found that to be very grounding and rooting. So iboga has been something that's been on my list, I think. But it's a little bit more risky, just because there can be complications with one's heart, I think.
And if you could sit in a psychedelic journey with any plant and with any person, dead or alive, what medicine and with who?
I think it would have been really great to do LSD with my dad. That would have been really great. Yeah, I'll go with that.
Sweet, feel that. And my final question for you is, in your most concise articulation, will you please describe the nature of consciousness?
Maybe consciousness is a field of existence that becomes aware of itself when awareness is present. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for opening to receive that and transmit that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just also want to reflect like how comfortable you are in spaciousness. And it's like really refreshing to feel that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of comfortable spaciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you for bringing your expanded space to our space here tonight at District. And
Yeah.
it's been a joy to host you.
Yeah, it's been great being here. This is a fantastic space.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you, everybody, for hanging out.